A billionaire watches a black waitress let her disabled son dance. What he does next is unbelievable. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen rain, casting golden reflections on every inch of the ballroom's marble floor. 100 whispers danced between the guests dressed in opulence. Velvet gowns, designer tuxedos, silk gloves lifting champagne flutes in gestures of shallow praise. The orchestra played softly in the background, a melody designed to soothe egos rather than stir souls. At the far end of the room, a man stood perfectly still. His suit was flawlessly tailored, midnight blue, his posture as rigid as the legacy his name carried. He didn't mingle. He observed, calculated, judged. His eyes scanned the room, not for pleasure, but for power. A thin smile curled at the corner of his mouth as he watched two executives from the energy sector fumble through small talk with a shipping tycoon's wife. He found it amusing how even the rich perform for one another. But then, his gaze landed on her. At first, he barely registered it, a blur of color near the back of the room, where the catering staff emerged from behind crimson curtains. She was moving too freely for a worker, too gracefully. She stepped out from the shadows, holding the hand of a small boy. The boy's suit was a size too big. His legs moved awkwardly, and his left arm remained slightly lifted, as if caught in an invisible sling. Yet he smiled. God, he smiled, as if this extravagant palace of marble and crystal was his playground. The woman whispered something to him. He nodded, then took a step forward, wobbling. She didn't stop him, didn't scold him. She let him go. And before the man in the midnight blue suit could even comprehend what was happening, the boy twirled in a crooked spin right in the middle of the dance floor, arms open wide, joy radiating off him like heat. Some guests turned. A few chuckled. One woman looked offended. But the mother, she clapped for him, softly, encouraging, proud, not embarrassed, not ashamed. The man narrowed his eyes. He recognized her, not her name. No, that was beneath his concern. But her face. He'd seen her tonight, carrying hors d'oeuvres, pouring wine for those who couldn't remember what they ordered. A waitress, letting her disabled child dance, alone, during a formal benefit gala. The man felt something ignite inside him. Annoyance, maybe. Disgust. Or is it something else? The orchestra hesitated, a few notes wobbling as the pianist turned to look. Murmurs spread. He should have looked away, but he couldn't. And just as he took a step forward, toward the boy, toward the woman, he heard someone behind him whisper, "She shouldn't be here, and neither should that child." A bitter silence followed, and then the boy tripped. Gasps. A tray shattered. Someone laughed. But the man didn't move. Not yet. His fists clenched. Something deep in his chest twisted, like a memory trying to claw its way out. He watched the mother rush forward and kneel beside the boy, brushing hair from his forehead and whispering something only the child could hear. The boy nodded, stood again, shaky but proud, and gave the room a tiny bow. The man's jaw tensed. His mind was already rewinding to another night, another child, another fall. He turned, abruptly, and walked toward the exit. But as he passed a mirror, he caught his own reflection, expressionless, eyes cold, and something behind them, something cracking. He didn't know it yet, but this night wasn't about to let him leave untouched. Not tonight, not after her. He pushed open the grand doors leading into the corridor, the sudden hush of solitude swallowing the murmur of the ballroom behind him. The sound of his polished shoes against the marble echoed in rhythm with the thud in his chest. He told himself he wasn't running from anything, just clearing his head, just air, that's all. But he lied. There was something about her, the woman, the way she moved without shame, the way she let the boy dance. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't recklessness. It was freedom. He hadn't seen that kind of freedom in decades. Not since. Julian. The voice behind him was light, familiar, and a bit too entitled. He turned slowly. Veronica. Red gown. Glass in hand. One of those women who aged well because she paid enough to make sure of it. "You're missing your own event," she teased, stepping closer. "The press is wondering if you're suddenly shy." Julian didn't answer right away. He looked past her, as if the walls were suddenly made of glass. "Did you see her?" he asked. Veronica blinked. "Who?" "The waitress. The one with the little boy." Veronica's lips curled into something smug. Oh, that one. Yes, I saw. Hard to miss. Causing quite the scene. Honestly, I'm surprised security hasn't removed them yet. Julian's brow furrowed. Remove them? Why would that? She chuckled. Come on, Jules. This is a black-tie charity event, not a children's recital. And let's be honest, she leaned in, lowering her voice. A woman like that, with a child like that, doesn't exactly belong on a dance floor, does she? Something sharp twisted in Julian's gut. He stared at her for a beat too long. Excuse me, he muttered. He walked past her without waiting for a reply, heading back toward the ballroom, his pace quicker now. Something had shifted. A thought, once buried, was scratching at the door of his mind. He re-entered the ballroom quietly, standing near the edge, unnoticed. The crowd had mostly gone back to its idle chatter, though a few still whispered about the incident. And then he saw her again. She was in the corner now, crouched beside her son, helping him sip water from a plastic cup. The boy's eyes lit up as he giggled, water dripping down his chin. She wiped it gently with a napkin, smiling like nothing else existed in the world. A kind of joy that couldn't be bought. For the first time in years, Julian felt jealous. He took a step forward, then another. But before he could reach her, a security guard approached. Ma'am, the guard said softly but firmly, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. There's been a complaint. The woman froze. She clutched her son protectively. What kind of complaint? She asked, eyes narrowing. Some guests feel uncomfortable. Management wants to move you to the service wing. Julian's breath caught. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't right. But she didn't argue. She stood tall, dignified, and gently lifted her son in her arms. We were just leaving anyway, she said calmly, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. Julian's hand twitched it aside. Say something. Do something. But he didn't. Not yet. He watched as they walked away, disappearing behind the red curtain through which she'd once emerged as invisible. And in that moment, he saw the ghost of someone else. A face from long ago. Tiny hands. A broken shoe. Laughter. Don't fall. A voice echoed in his memory. But if you do, fall proud. Julian closed his eyes. That woman wasn't just a stranger. She reminded him of someone. No, she reminded him of everyone he'd tried to forget. And that child. Something wasn't adding up. Julian couldn't shake the feeling. Not as the applause returned to the room for a speech he didn't hear. Not as more glasses clinked and the crowd shifted toward the silent auction tables. He stood there, motionless, as the image of the boy bowing awkwardly and the mother's unwavering eyes looped through his mind like a reel that refused to stop spinning. His past had always been a locked vault, and yet, tonight, something had picked the lock. He left the ballroom once again, this time with intention. The hallway was quieter now, the noise from the gala muffled like it belonged to another universe. He turned a corner toward the back wing, where the kitchen and staff quarters were, territory he'd never stepped into. Not because he was forbidden, but because he never needed to. Until now, a staff member in a black vest passed by, startled to see Julian there. Excuse me, sir, are you lost? The waitress, Julian said, voice low. The one with the child. Where did she go? The young man hesitated. I think she's in the break room with her son. She was told to stay there until things calmed down. Julian didn't thank him, just walked. His steps echoed down the narrower hallway, past racks of dishes and carts of desserts untouched by the wealthy mouths they were meant for. He reached the break room and paused outside the door. From within, he could hear a soft hum, a woman's voice, singing, low, sweet, almost a lullaby. He turned the handle. The room was small and harshly lit, the kind of place not meant for comfort, but she had created a bubble of warmth anyway. The boy sat on a folding chair, his eyes closed, his legs dangling and swaying gently. She knelt before him, humming a tune as she adjusted the sleeves of his oversized jacket. She didn't see Julian at first. He stepped in slowly, clearing his throat. She looked up, startled but composed. I'm sorry, she said quickly, rising to her feet. We were just waiting until we were allowed to go. Julian hesitated. You don't need to apologize. Her brows lifted slightly, surprised. She studied him now, not as a server observing a guest, but as a woman assessing a man. She didn't shrink beneath his gaze. You're the one from the balcony, she said after a moment. The one watching. You noticed? He asked, surprised. People like me always notice when we're being watched. There was no anger in her tone, just truth. Julian looked at the boy again, who was now peering at him curiously. What's his name? Julian asked. She hesitated. Eli. How old is he? 6. He'll tell you he's 7. He likes to believe he's older. Julian knelt slightly, bringing himself closer to the boy's level. Hi, Eli, he said, his voice softer than he expected. Eli waved, then pointed at Julian's jacket. Are you a magician? Julian blinked. No. Why would you think that? Because you're dressed like the man in Mommy's bedtime stories. Julian looked at the woman. She smiled faintly, brushing her son's hair behind his ear. He means the prince. I make up fairy tales sometimes. Julian stood slowly, clearing his throat. I saw him on the dance floor, he said. He was brave. He just wanted to feel part of something, she said, even if it was just for a minute. Silence stretched between them. You don't belong back here, Julian finally said. Her jaw tightened. I know. We never really do. No, Julian said. I mean it. You don't belong hidden. You belong seen. She looked at him long and hard. Why are you here, sir? He opened his mouth, then stopped. He didn't know how to answer, because there was a weight in his chest that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there. He just learned to ignore it. But Eli smiled at him again. That same crooked, radiant smile from the ballroom. And Julian felt it again. That scratching in his mind, a memory that wasn't fully formed. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he asked, What's your name? She hesitated for the briefest second. Naomi. Naomi. Why did that name make his stomach twist? The name followed him down the hallway like a scent from a past life. Faint, lingering, familiar in a way that made his skin itch. Naomi. He repeated it in his head, over and over, like it was a code he was meant to decipher. Julian returned to the ballroom, but this time he didn't join the crowd. He stood at the edge, half in the shadows, letting the music wash over him without absorbing any of it. Everything looked the same. Crystal chandeliers, golden lighting, laughter dipped in champagne. But it all felt colder now. He took out his phone, almost on instinct, tapped into the event's internal app. Something his PR team had developed. Photos of attendees, staff lists, donations in real time. He searched for Naomi. Nothing. No last name. No profile. No staff ID. He frowned. How could she not be listed? He scrolled again, back to the guest list, then to the donations. One in particular caught his eye, an anonymous donation, made just that morning. A sizable one, $40,000. He paused. No name attached, but the note read, For those who fall proud. That phrase, it hit him like glass breaking in his mind. Fall proud. The words Naomi had whispered to her son on the dance floor. He had heard them, and not just tonight. Somewhere else. Long ago. Julian's throat tightened. His fingers hovered above the phone screen. Fall proud, he whispered to himself. Suddenly, he was somewhere else, his memory hijacking the present. Flashback, 1978. A boy, maybe 10, stands at the edge of a park stage in a neighborhood far less polished. His shoes are worn. His knees scraped. He holds a paper crown in his hand, looking uncertain. Go ahead, a voice whispers. It's your story. But what if I fall? The boy asks. The woman behind him, young, radiant in a second-hand coat, smiles. Then fall proud, baby. Let him know you dare to climb. He remembers now. Her name had been Naomi, too. But that wasn't possible. That Naomi would be in her 60s by now, wouldn't she? Back in the ballroom, Julian blinked himself back into the present, sweat beating at his temple. He needed answers. He exited again, this time not caring who noticed. Down the back hall, past the kitchen, to the service wing. He found the break room empty. No sign of Naomi or Eli. Panic bloomed in his chest. He turned, searching, and spotted a young waitress stacking plates in the prep room. Have you seen the woman with the child? He asked, more urgent than intended. She blinked, unsure. You mean Naomi? She clocked out early. Said the boy was tired. Where did she go? No idea, sir. I think she walks home. Walks? At this hour? What's her last name? Julian asked. The waitress looked around and lowered her voice. She doesn't use one. I don't even think Naomi is her real name. That hit harder than expected. She was a ghost in his own house. Outside, The wind had picked up. Julian stepped into the cold night air, the gala's laughter muffled behind glass. His driver waited at the curb, but he waved him off. He needed to move, to walk, to find her. He didn't know why, only that if he didn't see her again tonight, something inside him would close shut forever. And he didn't know if he'd survive that. The city outside the gala was wrapped in a velvet hush. Buildings like silhouettes under a moody sky, streetlights flickering like nervous thoughts. Julian pulled his coat tighter as he crossed the plaza alone, the cold biting at his fingertips. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement, but he didn't notice the sound anymore. All he could hear was that phrase echoing in his head like a bell tolling just beneath the surface. Fall proud. He didn't know what he was chasing. Redemption? Closure? The ghost of a memory that wouldn't stay buried? All he knew was that her eyes, Naomi's eyes, held something he hadn't seen in a long time. Not since. No, he couldn't go there yet. He wandered through streets he hadn't walked in years, places his wealth had erased from his routine. At a red light, he paused near a bus stop. A homeless man muttered to himself on the bench. Across the street, a mother was tucking a blanket around her sleeping child in a shopping cart. A different world. He was no stranger to suffering. He had simply built walls tall enough to forget it. But now, those walls were cracking, and Naomi's face was in every fracture. He checked his phone. No signal, no leads, only a blank screen and a name that meant everything and nothing. Then a voice behind him, looking for someone. Julian turned sharply. A man in his late 50s stood beneath a flickering street lamp, holding a broom and wearing a faded maintenance uniform. His name tag read Carlos. "You were at the gala," the man said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I clean the place every night after the suits leave. Saw you watching her." Julian didn't deny it. "Do you know her?" he asked, stepping closer. "Naomi." Carlos tilted his head. "I know she's got the strongest heart I've ever seen. Comes in early, leaves late. Never complains. That boy of hers. He's her whole world." Julian's voice dropped. "Do you know where she lives?" Carlos hesitated. He looked Julian up and down, judging whether or not he was safe. "Why do you want to know?" Julian looked at him, eyes dark and honest. "Because I think she might know something about a part of my life I've tried to forget." Carlos seemed to chew on the words. "She don't talk much. Keeps to herself. But she walks past St. Andrew's Church around midnight. Takes the long way home so the kid can see the stained glass windows." Julian's chest tightened. "Thank you." Carlos nodded, then added, "She don't owe you nothing, you know. Whatever it is you're looking for, don't expect her to heal it for you." Julian didn't reply, just turned and headed toward the church. Midnight. The stained glass of St. Andrew's glowed faintly under the moonlight, saints frozen in technicolor silence. Julian waited near the steps, the wind tugging at his coat, his breath visible with each exhale. Then movement. A shadow appeared down the block. A woman in a dark coat, carrying a child bundled in fabric and dreams. She walked slowly, deliberately, stopping in front of the church window. She wasn't praying. She was remembering. Julian stepped forward. "Naomi." She froze. Her head turned slowly. Eli stirred in her arms but didn't wake. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. Julian didn't have a script, only truth. "I think I've seen you before," he said, "but not tonight. I mean, years ago." Naomi's eyes searched his. For lies, for danger, for recognition. Then softly, "You don't remember, do you?" The wind howled behind them, as if the city itself was leaning in to hear. "Remember what?" he asked. Naomi looked down at her son, then back at him. "I think you better sit down." They sat side by side on the cold stone steps of St. Andrew's, beneath saints frozen in eternal glass prayer. Eli was nestled between them, his head resting gently against Naomi's chest, his breathing soft and even. The city was quiet now. Only the distant hum of a late train and the occasional gust of wind accompanied them. Julian watched Naomi as she gazed forward, not at him, not at anything in particular, just lost somewhere between the past and the flickering street lamps. He broke the silence. "What don't I remember?" Naomi closed her eyes. Her fingers gently stroked Eli's hair. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but each word seemed to cost her something. "You came to the shelter on Jefferson Avenue. Once, maybe twice." Julian blinked. Jefferson Avenue. The name echoed like a bell from a different life. I used to volunteer there, she continued, a long time ago. Before Eli. Before I even finished school. You were just a boy. Angry. Always quiet. Always reading the same worn-out book in the corner. You didn't want anyone to talk to you. Julian's heart thumped like a distant drumbeat. You remember that? He asked, incredulous. I remember everyone who came through those doors, she said. But you were different. You didn't ask for anything. Not food, not comfort, just silence. And you clung to that book like it was the only thing keeping you alive. Julian felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. He faltered. That was a lifetime ago. Not long enough to forget, she said softly. They sat in silence again, the weight of unspoken memories thick in the air. Julian finally looked at her. You said your name was Naomi, the woman who used to read to us at night. She had that name too. That's because it was me, she replied, her eyes finally meeting his. But that woman was older. She had gray streaks, wore glasses. Naomi laughed gently, almost bitterly. Trauma ages you, Julian, and kindness wears thin when the world gives you nothing back. Julian flinched. She'd said his name like it wasn't a stranger to her lips. You knew who I was tonight, he said. She nodded. The moment I saw you looking at Eli, you still watch people the same way. Like you're solving a puzzle no one asked you to touch. Julian exhaled, slow and heavy. Why didn't you say anything? Naomi turned her gaze back to the church windows. Because some people build walls so high, they can't even hear a knock anymore. He wanted to argue, defend himself, but he knew she was right. So what now? He asked. Naomi looked down at her son, then at Julian. That depends. Are you here because you care? Or because you feel guilty for forgetting people who once cared about you? Julian's breath caught. I don't know, he whispered. Naomi nodded as if that answer made more sense than any excuse. Then maybe it's time you start remembering. And with that, she stood, lifted Eli gently into her arms. He stirred slightly, then returned to sleep. Walk us home, she asked, her voice softer now. Julian didn't hesitate. He rose, brushed the cold from his coat, and followed her into the night. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, under a sky littered with stars that felt too far away to matter. The city had hushed around them, shrinking into silence, as if it knew their story needed room to breathe. Naomi carried Eli with practiced ease, one arm under his legs, the other supporting his back, her chin occasionally brushing his curls as he slept. Julian walked beside her, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, his eyes forward, but his thoughts tangled behind his ribs. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, reverent, like a long pause between verses in a song too painful to finish. Finally, she broke it. You disappeared, you know. Julian looked at her. She wasn't accusing him, just stating a fact. One day, you stopped showing up at the shelter. I asked about you for weeks. No one knew where you'd gone. He nodded, lips tight. My mother died, he said. Overdose. I was 12. Naomi's steps slowed for a moment, then resumed. And your father? Julian shook his head. Never met him. Didn't even have a name. Just a note in a file that said, unknown. He didn't mean to say that out loud. But once the words left him, they hung there, raw and exposed. I was placed in a foster system, he continued, then bounced around. Group homes, juvenile centers. Eventually, I aged out. Naomi nodded like she knew the story already. Because she probably did. Not his specifically, but the pattern. The wound dressed in a different name. And now, she asked. Now I own 7 companies, 2 foundations. My face has been on the cover of 5 magazines. And yet, he looked at her. I don't remember the last time someone hugged me without asking for something first. Naomi glanced sideways at him, her voice quiet. Do you remember the last time you gave something without expecting it to pay off? That hit harder than it should have. Julian looked away. The streetlights ahead flickered. A cat darted across the road. Somewhere, a siren wailed in the distance. You knew, he said. Even back then, you knew I was breaking. Everyone in that shelter was broken. Julian, you just hit it better than most. They turned down a narrow side street, lined with buildings worn from time, their bricks chipped, their balconies rusting. They stopped in front of an old walk-up, 3 floors, paint peeling at the edges, a dim yellow porch light buzzing overhead. Naomi shifted Eli in her arms and fished for her keys. Julian hesitated. Is this where you live? Third floor. No, elevator. She gave a half smile. I call it our mountain. He followed her inside without asking. The stairwell smelled of old wood and laundry detergent. He watched as she climbed, careful not to jostle Eli too much. By the time they reached the third floor, Julian was breathing harder than he expected. Naomi unlocked the door and pushed it open with her shoulder. The apartment was small, but clean. Worn furniture, toys in the corner, drawings on the wall. Eli's, clearly. Crayon lines and suns with crooked smiles. Naomi laid Eli gently on the couch, tucking a blanket around him. She kissed his forehead, then walked back toward Julian, standing near the door. Would you like some tea? She asked. He nodded, surprised by his own answer. As she moved to the tiny kitchen, Julian took in the space. It was the opposite of his world. No glass walls, no art worth thousands. Just life, honest and quiet and messy in the right places. Naomi returned with 2 chipped mugs. Handed him one. Chamomile, she said. Best I can do. He took a sip. Warm, earthy, real. Naomi, he said quietly. Can I ask you something? She met his eyes. Of course. Is Eli mine? The question slipped out before he had time to censor it. And her face didn't flinch. But her eyes told a story all on their own. The room went still, not silent, because the heater clicked softly in the background, and a car honked 3 blocks away, but still, like the air itself had forgotten how to move. Naomi didn't answer immediately. She placed her mug gently on the table, as though any sudden movement might shatter more than porcelain. Julian remained frozen, the question still hanging between them like a fragile thread that, once pulled, could unravel them both. Naomi looked down at Eli, his chest rising and falling beneath the blanket, then turned back to Julian. No, she said finally, voice low but steady. He's not your son. The breath Julian hadn't realized he was holding escaped in a rush. Not relief, not disappointment, just a shock of release. But then she added, but someone like you could have been. He blinked. What does that mean? Naomi sat slowly on the armrest of the couch, her fingers playing with the frayed edges of her sleeve. Eli's father was a man who wore suits like armor, walked into rooms like he owned the world. He said the right things, promised the right dreams. But when I told him I was pregnant, she shook her head, eyes darkening. He vanished, like I was never real. Julian lowered his gaze. I know that kind of man, he murmured. So do I, she replied. That's why I saw through you the moment you looked at him. You didn't see a boy. You saw a reminder. He looked at her, caught in the honesty of her words. Of what? Of everything you abandoned in yourself to survive. The heater clicked again. A whistle of wind slipped through the window frame. Julian took another sip of tea, though it had cooled now. Naomi watched him, her face unreadable. You built a fortress around yourself, Julian. Wealth, status, control. But that little boy on the dance floor, he didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to belong. Julian looked at Eli. The boy's hand had slipped from under the blanket and was now resting over his chest, fingers twitching slightly in a dream. I didn't come here to be saved, Julian said quietly. Good, Naomi replied, because I'm not here to save you. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. But maybe, she said softly, you came here to remember who you used to be, before the world taught you to stop feeling. Julian remained seated, his hands gripping the mug tightly. I never stopped feeling, he said after a moment. I just forgot how to let it show. Naomi turned back to him, leaning against the window frame. Then maybe tonight was your reminder. There was again that gentle strength in her voice, the same one he'd heard as a child in the shelter, the voice that told bedtime stories to kids who didn't believe in dreams anymore. He stood slowly. Can I see you again? He asked. Naomi tilted her head. What for? I don't know, he admitted, but it feels like I need to. She didn't answer right away. She crossed the room, gently adjusted Eli's blanket again, then looked back at Julian. Come back tomorrow, she said finally, but not as the man from the gala. He furrowed his brow. Then as who? Her eyes softened, as the boy who used to read in the corner, the one who still believed books could change the world. And then, gently, she opened the door for him. Good night, Julian. He stepped into the hallway, the scent of chamomile and old wood following him. "Good night, Naomi." As the door closed behind him, Julian felt something strange. Not hope, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, he'd finally started to feel again. The door clicked shut behind him, but its echo followed Julian all the way down the narrow stairwell, shadowing each careful step he took. By the time he reached the sidewalk, the night felt colder, heavier, as if the city had somehow grown while he was upstairs. He shoved his hands in his coat pockets, turned his collar up against the wind, and began walking with no direction in mind. He didn't go home. He couldn't. The apartment, the penthouse, was too sterile, too polished, too empty. Everything inside it was curated. Imported rugs, designer lighting, art worth more than a year's salary for most people. Yet none of it had ever felt like it belonged to him. He had filled every room except the one that mattered, the space inside himself. Now, somehow, a boy with uneven steps and a woman with tired eyes had reopened that room, and all he could think about was a crayon sun drawn on a cracked wall. He walked for hours, past alleys that smelled of metal and oil, past diners still open for the graveyard shift, past drunk couples fighting in the glow of traffic lights. And with every block, he remembered something. A smell from childhood, a bench he once slept under, a corner where he'd been mugged and left with nothing but a scar on his chin. He ended up in front of the old Jefferson Avenue shelter just before dawn. It was boarded up now, windows cracked, paint peeling. A for sale sign hung crookedly on the fence. Weeds had overtaken the courtyard, and the rusted gate let out a metallic shriek when Julian pushed it open. He stepped inside, into the shell of his past. The hallway was still there, narrow, lined with faded murals of animals and stars. He passed a room where Naomi had once read stories to a dozen silent children. He stopped in the spot where he used to sit, curled into himself with that same worn-out book. The Little Prince. Torn pages. No cover. The only thing he'd carried with him through every home, every system. A memory rose uninvited. If someone loves a flower, of which just one single blossom grows in all the millions and millions of stars, Naomi had read aloud, her voice warm in the darkness. It is enough to make him happy when he looks at the stars. That was the night he cried for the first time in months, quietly, into his knees, so no one would notice. But she had, and she hadn't said a word, just kept reading. He stood there now, breathing in dust and grief, letting the weight of years collapse over him like ash. Then, slowly, he pulled out his phone. He opened a blank note, and he began to write. "I want to save this place." A message to himself. A promise. He didn't know what it would take. How much money? How much red tape? But he would do it. Because it wasn't just a shelter. It was where he learned that kindness didn't always come in big gestures. Sometimes, it came in a bedtime story read by a stranger who saw you when no one else did. Hours later, Julian stood in front of his boardroom window, looking out over the city as the sun cracked open the horizon. His assistant buzzed in. "Sir, the acquisition documents for the Benton building need your signature. Also, your legal team is waiting on the conference call regarding the Taiwan merger." Julian didn't turn around. "Cancel both." "Excuse me. Cancel everything today." A long pause. "Understood." Julian turned from the skyline, picked up his coat, and left the office without another word. He had somewhere else to be, and this time, he knew who he wanted to be when he arrived. Naomi was in the kitchen when she heard the knock. It was soft, almost unsure of itself, like whoever stood behind the door wasn't entirely convinced they deserved to be there. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, peeked at Eli, still asleep on the couch, his arm thrown across a stuffed elephant, then walked quietly to the door. She opened a crack. Julian stood there, no suit this time, no overcoat, just a worn navy sweater, jeans, and sneakers that looked like they'd been untouched for years. He held nothing in his hands, and for once, his eyes weren't calculating. They were just open. "You came back," Naomi said softly. "You asked me to," he replied, then offered a faint smile. As the boy in the corner, Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she opened the door wider. "Come in." The apartment felt warmer this morning, filled with the aroma of cinnamon and something baking. A small radio hummed in the background, playing an old jazz tune that curled through the air like memory. Julian stepped inside, taking it all in. Eli was still asleep, though one eye had begun to flutter open, as if sensing something new in the air. "I brought something," Julian said suddenly, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out a thin, battered book. Naomi blinked. The Little Prince. He held it like it was a fragile artifact, reverent. "I found it last night," he said. "I thought I lost it years ago, but it was in a box hidden in the back of my closet, beneath everything I thought I'd outgrown." Naomi took it carefully, running her fingers over the cracked spine. "You kept it all this time?" "It was the only thing I didn't sell, trade, or give away. I guess part of me always needed it." She smiled gently and placed the book on the table, right beside a drawing Eli had made of a stick figure man holding a star. Julian sat across from her, his fingers interlaced. "I went to the shelter last night," he confessed. "It's falling apart. Empty. Forgotten." "Yeah," Naomi nodded. "After the funding stopped, it barely lasted a year. I want to fix it." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You mean donate?" He shook his head. "No, I mean buy it. Rebuild it. Not just the walls, but the purpose. A place for people like us. Kids who slip through the cracks. Mothers who work 2 jobs and still can't breathe. People who've been told too many times that they don't belong." He paused. His voice cracked a little. "I want to give them a room where they can sit in silence with a book and a woman with a voice like yours reading to them, telling them that stars matter, and so do they." Naomi stared at him, the weight of what he was offering settling over her slowly. "You think money can fix everything, Julian?" "No," he said, "but I think it can open doors. And I want to open that one again." A soft rustling interrupted them. Eli was awake now, sitting up, blinking sleep from his eyes. He looked at Julian, then at his mother, then back at Julian. "Did you bring breakfast?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Julian smiled. "No, but if you let me, I'd like to take you both out for pancakes." Eli grinned. "With chocolate chips. Only if your mom says yes." Naomi stood slowly, still watching Julian, as if trying to read something buried beneath the surface. "Okay," she said, "but you're paying." Julian chuckled. "Deal." Eli jumped off the couch, ran to get his shoes, and Naomi grabbed her coat from the hook. As they stepped out into the hallway, Julian glanced back at the apartment one last time. Its smallness, its warmth, its quiet strength. And then he looked at them. Naomi and Eli, a mother and child who had nothing, and yet everything. And for the first time in a long time, Julian felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a home too. The small diner was tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore, the kind of place that still smelled like burnt toast and served coffee in mugs that didn't match. Vinyl booze creaked when you sat, and the waitresses called everyone honey. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't polished. But as Julian watched Naomi slide into the booth across from him and Eli press his nose to the syrup bottles like they were magical potions, he realized this place felt alive. They ordered pancakes, extra chocolate chips, whipped cream for Eli, black coffee for Julian, though he winced at the bitterness. Naomi smiled at that, stirring her own gently. "No sugar. You're not used to simple things anymore, are you?" she asked, teasing but not unkind. Julian shook his head, a faint smirk forming. "Not really. My coffee usually comes in a gold-rimmed cup delivered by an intern named Lars." Naomi laughed, really laughed, and, for a moment, Julian felt the weight in his chest lighten. "So," she said, eyes narrowing playfully, "what happened to you after the shelter? After you disappeared?" Julian looked down, tracing the rim of his mug. "I got angry," he said, "at everything. I started stealing, fighting. Got kicked out of 3 foster homes before I even turned 14. Naomi listened, eyes steady, and then I met someone who didn't treat me like a broken thing." He paused. "A teacher, Mrs. Alvarez. She caught me trying to hack into the school's computer to change my failing grades, and instead of calling the cops, she gave me a laptop." Naomi tilted her head. "That's when it started. That's when everything started," Julian said. "By 17, I had built an app. Sold at 18. Started a company at 20. First million by 21. And still all alone." That silenced him. Eli tugged on his sleeve. "Do you have a big house?" "Too big," Julian answered. "With a pool." 3. Eli's eyes widened. "Why do you need 3? Julian smiled. "I've been asking myself that question lately. The waitress returned with the pancakes, steam rising in sweet spirals. Eli dug in, eyes lighting up like Christmas. Naomi poured syrup with care. Julian just watched them. Watched the way Naomi brushed crumbs from Eli's chin. The way Eli leaned into her touch, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're good with him," Julian said quietly. Naomi looked up, her eyes cautious. "I have to be." "No," Julian said. "I mean, you're good with him in a way most people wouldn't be. A lot of people would have left, given up, put him in someone else's care. But you fight for him. Every second." Naomi's expression softened. "That's what love is. Choosing someone. Over and over. Even when it's hard." Julian swallowed hard. "I don't think I've ever had someone do that for me. Maybe it's time you do it for yourself." The clatter of silverware and the hiss of the griddle filled the silence between them. But something invisible had shifted again. The air between Julian and Naomi had changed. Warmer, closer, realer. He glanced down at his plate. Took a bite. "Okay," he said, nodding. "That's good. That's really good." Eli raised his fork in approval. Mouth full. "I told you. Chocolate fixes everything." Julian chuckled. Naomi just smiled. And for a moment, just one quiet moment, none of them were broken. They were just here. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the buildings and the world turned golden, Julian found himself walking beside Naomi and Eli through a quiet park not far from her apartment. The trees rustled gently in the breeze, their leaves shimmering like coins catching the light. Eli ran ahead, chasing invisible dragons with a stick he'd declared a royal sword. Naomi walked in silence, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her eyes following her son with a mix of pride and vigilance. Julian walked beside her, hands in his pockets, every step feeling lighter than the last. "He's happy," Julian said, watching Eli leap over a patch of grass. "Even with all the challenges, he seems like a genuinely happy kid." Naomi nodded slowly. "He is. Because I protect that happiness like my life depends on it. Because sometimes it does." Julian glanced at her. "Do you ever regret it?" She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. "No," she said without hesitation. "It's hard. God, it's exhausting. But no, he's the best thing I've ever done." They stopped at a bench overlooking a small pond. Ducks drifted lazily across the water. The moment felt borrowed, too quiet, too calm for the weight both of them carried. Julian sat first. Naomi followed. "I think I'm starting to understand," he said, watching the ducks. "Why you let him dance? Why you didn't stop him?" Naomi looked at him sideways. "I never wanted him to feel like his limits defined him. I wanted him to lead, to move the world, even if just for 1 minute. And he did." Julian nodded. "He did. And you know what's crazy?" he asked, turning to her. "He led me to." Naomi's face softened. "Maybe that's what we're all doing. Following the people brave enough to step out and move, no matter how shaky their steps are." Eli called out from a distance. "Mom, Julian, come see the ducks." They rose and followed, and as they walked, Julian asked quietly, "Do you believe in second chances?" Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then, "Only if they come with change, not just promises." "I want to change," Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi stopped walking, faced him, then started by showing up. "Not just for us, for yourself. Stop hiding behind your companies and donations and titles. Be present. Be real." He nodded. She looked at him for a long time, then finally said, "Come to Eli's therapy session tomorrow." "What?" "He has physical therapy twice a week. He always asks why you weren't there. He doesn't say your name, of course, just the magician man." She smiled faintly. "You wanted to be part of something? Then show up." Julian looked away, blinking hard. "I will. I'll be there." "Good." They reached Eli, who was now pointing at 2 ducks fighting over a crust of bread. He grabbed Julian's hand without hesitation. "Can you make them stop fighting?" he asked, tugging. Julian knelt beside him. "Maybe if we give them more bread," he said. "Sometimes people only fight because they're afraid there isn't enough to go around." Naomi watched them, this unlikely scene of connection, and something in her chest ached in the most beautiful way. As the sun began to set and their shadows stretched long across the grass, none of them knew that the next day would bring something unexpected, something none of them were ready for. Because just when Julian thought he'd found peace, the past came knocking again, and this time, It wasn't a memory. It was a man, a stranger, watching them from across the park, eyes locked on Julian, waiting. The man across the park didn't move. He stood beneath the shadow of a maple tree, dressed in a gray coat too clean for coincidence, hands folded neatly in front of him like a visitor waiting to be called in. He wasn't watching the ducks. He wasn't watching Eli. He was watching Julian. Julian felt it instantly. That ancient tension in his spine, the hair rising at the back of his neck. He turned slowly, meeting the stranger's gaze, and in that locked moment, something inside him twisted. Recognition flickered, but from where? Naomi noticed the change in his posture and followed his gaze. "Who is that?" she asked. Julian's jaw clenched. "I don't know, but I'm about to find out." He walked away from the pond, steady and slow, each step deliberate. As he approached, the man smiled faintly. "Mr. Vance," the man said. "Been a long time." Julian stopped a few feet away. His voice was calm, but firm. "You have me at a disadvantage." "Do I?" the man replied, tilting his head. "That's unusual for you." Julian stared, then narrowed his eyes. "You were at St. Augustine, group home number 4. The man nodded once. "You remembered. What do you want?" "Answers. Same as you." Julian's voice lowered. "I'm not the same kid you knew back then." "That's exactly why I came," the man said. "Because I am." Julian said nothing. The wind stirred between them. "You got out," the man continued. "Found your golden staircase. But some of us stayed. Some of us sank. And some of us kept watching." Julian's fists clenched slightly. "So, this is about resentment?" "No," the man said, taking a slow step forward. "This is about truth. About the truth you never knew. The one buried in your file." Julian's breath caught. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin envelope. "You ever wonder why no one came for you? Why no one ever claimed you?" Julian didn't move. "Inside this envelope is a name," the man said. "The name of someone who paid to keep your file sealed. Someone who made sure you'd never be found." Julian took the envelope slowly. His hand shook. "Why now?" he asked. "Because you're finally looking backward," the man said. "And because Naomi and that boy of hers. They deserve to know who you were before you decide who you want to be." With that, the man turned and walked away, vanishing as quietly as he had come. Julian stared at the envelope. Naomi came up beside him, Eli trailing behind with a curious look. "What was that?" she asked gently. Julian looked at her, then at Eli, then down at the paper in his hand. "The past," he whispered, begging not to be forgotten. He opened it. One name, written in sharp, unforgiving ink. His father, alive, powerful, and close. Naomi read the expression on his face and stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Do you want to find him?" she asked. Julian looked at her, heart pounding. I want to choose not to need him anymore." Naomi nodded, silent approval in her eyes. He knelt down to Eli's level. "Hey, magician man," Eli said with a giggle. "Why do you look scared?" Julian smiled, pulling him into a hug. "Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay." He stood up and looked at Naomi. "I want to be around, not just for pancakes and park days. I want to be part of this, whatever this is." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Then stay." And so he did. He stayed through the therapy appointments, through the paperwork to rebuild the shelter, through the first time Eli called him family, through the day Naomi gave him a drawer in the apartment, through the nights when silence didn't feel empty anymore, but full. Julian never needed his past to make him whole. He needed something far rarer, someone who believed in his future. And as the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, a millionaire, a mother, and a boy with a crooked smile walked home together, hand in hand. Not by blood, not by history, but by choice. Sometimes, the richest people are the ones who finally learn how to love. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and comment below where in the world you're watching from. And remember, sometimes, miracles wear everyday faces.